The royal hall of planet Valora was filled with golden light and proud faces. Musicians played slow tunes. Banners of the royal family waved above, and hundreds of guests gathered to see the wedding of the century. At the center of it all stood Leora, the deaf alien bride. Her skin shimmered softly, her white gown sparkling with crystals. She couldn't hear the music, but she could feel the rhythm through the floor. For a moment, she felt happy. Maybe this would be the day her life changed. Then she saw his face. The king of Valora, tall and sharp-eyed, looked down at her with disgust. His smile disappeared. The whispers began. Leora could not hear them, but she could read lips easily. She saw the words form again and again across their sneering mouths. Too fat. Too weak, too broken. The king stepped closer. "This is not what I was promised," he said coldly. His voice, though unheard by her, made the guests go silent. He turned toward the court and raised his hand. "I will not marry a defect." "End this ceremony." Gasps filled the room. The guards moved forward. Leora tried to speak, but her trembling voice was lost in the noise she couldn't hear. She reached out with shaking hands, trying to sign something, but the king only turned away. Her crown slipped from her head and rolled across the marble floor. The laughter began. She didn't need ears to know it. She saw their faces twisted in mockery, their mouths wide with cruel delight. Tears rolled down her pale cheeks as she stood alone before them all. The king's words were short, sharp, and final. "Take her away." Two guards grabbed her arms and pushed her out of the hall. Her gown tore on the marble steps. The night wind hit her face like ice as the doors slammed shut behind her. She was no longer a bride, just another unwanted thing. Outside, she fell to her knees. The world around her was silent, cold, and endless. She looked up at the twin moons shining above and whispered words only she could feel on her lips. Why was I born like this? For hours, she walked through the empty streets of Valora City, her gown dragging through dust and broken lights. Nobody stopped for her. Nobody looked. Her silver eyes shimmered with tears as she reached the lower district, where the air smelled of smoke and oil. That's when she saw a flicker of light. A small workshop stood at the corner of the alley, its sign half broken. Eli's repair dock. Inside, a human was working under the hood of an old cargo hauler. The sound of metal clanging echoed softly through the night. Eli Cross, a tired human mechanic with oil-stained hands, was fixing a ship engine when he heard a faint thud outside. He looked up, frowning, and walked to the door. What he saw made him pause. A woman in a torn wedding dress sitting in the dirt, holding a broken crown. Her face was streaked with tears, her hands trembling. He stepped closer. "Hey, are you okay?"
he asked gently.
But she didn't look up. She didn't react at all. Confused, he repeated louder, "Ma'am, do you need help?" Still nothing. That's when he noticed the faint translator tag on her neck, malfunctioning, flickering in red. And then it hit him. She wasn't ignoring him. She couldn't hear him. Eli quickly found a piece of metal sheet and scratched a few words with a screwdriver. "Are you hurt?" He showed it to her. Leora blinked in surprise. She took the metal, traced the letters with her finger, and looked at him with wide, tearful eyes. Slowly, she nodded. He smiled softly, offering her his jacket. She hesitated, but when he placed it over her shoulders, warmth spread through her for the first time that night. Eli led her inside, sat her by the heater, and poured her some water. She held the cup carefully, still watching him. For the first time in years, someone wasn't laughing. Someone wasn't calling her broken. She didn't know his name. He didn't know hers. But in that small workshop filled with humming engines and glowing lights, something new began. Quiet, fragile, but real. Outside, in the cold streets of Valora, a group of royal guards marched silently. The king had given an order: erase the shame. Find the girl. And their scanners had already picked up her trail, leading straight to the human's workshop. The night grew colder outside the workshop, but inside, the small heater filled the air with a soft hum. Eli Cross sat on the floor beside the strange woman he had found in the alley. Her torn wedding dress shimmered under the dull workshop light, and her silver eyes reflected both fear and exhaustion. She sat quietly, clutching the cup of water he'd given her, her fingers trembling slightly. Eli didn't speak for a while. He could tell she couldn't hear him, but something in her eyes told him she understood silence better than anyone ever could. He grabbed a small piece of metal again and scratched new words. "What's your name?" She read it slowly, then hesitated. Her lips moved carefully, forming the word without sound. "Leora." Eli smiled and nodded, writing back, "I'm Eli." Her eyes softened. It had been so long since anyone had looked at her like she mattered. Most people stared at her ears, her body, her silence. But this human's eyes stayed kind. He didn't flinch when she signed with her hands. He didn't look away when she spoke without sound. Eli glanced at her broken crown lying on the work table. It was made of alien gold and fine crystal, far too royal for the lower districts. Whoever she wasn't just anyone. He wrote again, "Were you in danger?" Leora looked down. She took the crown, turned it in her hands, then traced a few words on the dusty floor using her finger. "The king rejected me." Eli frowned. "The king?" he whispered, realizing who she must be. The royal wedding had been broadcast all across Valora earlier that day. He remembered seeing the image of a bride in white. Now she sat in front of him, broken and alone. He sighed softly and wiped his hands on a cloth. "Guess I picked a big problem this time," he murmured to himself. But when he looked at her again, all he saw was a person, someone who needed kindness, not a royal scandal. He pointed to a cot in the corner and wrote one more word: "Sleep." Leora nodded slowly and lay down, wrapping herself in a blanket he handed her. For the first time in years, she felt safe enough to close her eyes. Eli sat nearby, pretending to check tools, but his eyes kept drifting back to her. Something about her calm silence filled the room with peace. Outside, the peace didn't last. 3 armored royal guards landed in the district. Their scanners blinked red as they followed traces of royal fabric and biosignature energy. The rejected bride must be eliminated. "No witnesses," the captain said coldly. The sound of heavy boots echoed through the street. Inside, Eli's security monitor flashed a warning. Motion sensors had detected movement near the entrance. He turned to the door and cursed under his breath. He reached for his plasma wrench, the closest thing to a weapon he had. He quickly wrote a note and placed it beside Leora's bed. "Stay down. Don't move." The door burst open. 3 alien soldiers stepped in, weapons glowing. "Human," one hissed. "You are harboring royal property." Eli raised his hands, his voice calm but firm. "She's not property. She's a person," the soldier sneered. "She is a royal mistake. Step aside." Eli didn't. His heart pounded, but he stood tall. "You'll have to go through me." The guard moved forward, but before he could fire, the workshop's security barrier flickered alive. Eli had triggered it from his wrist pad. Sparks flew, blinding the guards for a moment. He grabbed Leora's hand and pulled her toward the back door. She stumbled, confused, but followed. He led her through narrow alleys until they reached an old cargo ship docked behind the workshop. He opened the hatch and motioned for her to get in. She looked at him with wide, scared eyes, signing something quickly with her hands. He couldn't understand the full meaning, but he caught one word. "Why?" He smiled, wrote quickly on his pad, and showed her the screen. "Because nobody deserves to be thrown away." Tears filled her eyes. She touched his hand gently, a silent thank you in her language. As the ship's engines rumbled to life, the guards finally broke through the barrier behind them. Laser bolts flashed in the night sky as the cargo ship lifted off. Eli gritted his teeth, steering hard toward the mountains beyond the city. For the first time since her rejection, Leora felt something powerful inside her chest: hope. And Eli, a human mechanic with nothing to his name, had just made a promise he didn't even say aloud, to protect her no matter what came next. The cargo ship cut through the dark sky, engines humming softly as it left the glowing lights of Valora City far behind. Inside, the air was thick with silence and fear. Eli cross-sat in the pilot's chair, eyes fixed on the stars ahead. Beside him, Leora sat quietly, holding her broken crown close to her chest. Through the window, she saw the city fade away, a place that had once promised love and instead gave her humiliation. Her heart ached, but this time it wasn't just from pain. Somewhere deep inside, a small spark of safety flickered. The human who saved her didn't treat her like a mistake. He looked at her as if she mattered. Eli looked at her reflection in the glass. She was staring at the stars like they were whispering secrets only she could feel. He wished he could talk to her easily, to tell her she wasn't alone anymore. But words didn't matter right now, actions did. He tapped her shoulder gently and pointed at the glowing console. The ship's radar flashed red. He scribbled a few words on his data pad. They're following us. Leora's eyes widened. She turned to the window and saw distant lights moving fast behind them, royal hunter crafts. The king had already sent his soldiers. Eli gritted his teeth. Of course, he muttered under his breath. They never make it easy. He pushed the throttle forward and the ship jolted. Leora grabbed the armrest, steadying herself. Her silent fear filled the cabin. Outside, the night sky exploded into streaks of blue light as plasma fire chased them. Eli rolled the ship hard to the left, metal groaning under the pressure. "Hold on!" he shouted, though he knew she couldn't hear him. Still, she clung to the seat, trusting his movements completely. One of the hunter crafts got close enough to lock on. The targeting alarm beeped. Eli slammed his fist on the controls. Not today. He flipped a switch, releasing a burst of engine coolant that fogged the space behind them. The sensors on the enemy craft glitched and the laser missed by inches. Leora felt the ship shudder and looked toward Eli. He gave a small thumbs up, trying to ease her fear. She smiled faintly, clutching her chest. After a long, tense minute, the radar lights disappeared. The hunters had lost their signal. Eli slowed the ship and sighed with relief. He turned to her, panting lightly, and scribbled again. "We're safe." "For now," Leora nodded. She reached into her gown and pulled out a small pendant, a symbol of her family crest. She held it out to him. Confused, Eli hesitated, but she gently placed it in his hand. Her lips formed silent words, "Thank you." Eli stared at the pendant, then at her. "You don't owe me anything," he said softly, knowing she couldn't hear. But maybe she could feel the kindness in his eyes. They landed the ship in a quiet canyon far from the city, where mountains shielded them from sensors. The twin moons rose above, casting soft silver light over the sand. Eli started a small campfire near the ship. Leora sat across from him, her face glowing in the warmth. For the first time since he found her, she looked peaceful. She watched him repair a small drone beside the fire, fascinated by how patient he was. Every time the sparks flew, she smiled faintly, tracing the light with her eyes. Eli noticed her watching and grinned. He wrote on a metal plate beside him, "You like fixing things too?" She laughed silently, nodding. She reached forward and pointed at the drone, then mimed tightening a screw. Eli chuckled. "All right, partner. Let's see what you've got," he said softly. Together they worked in quiet harmony, the human and the deaf alien bride, two broken souls finding peace in simple creation. But far above the canyon, hidden drones were already scanning for life signs. In the royal palace, the king stood before a holographic screen showing the planet's surface. His eyes burned with fury. "She escaped with a human mechanic," one of his captains said. "We've lost their signal, but scouts are searching." The king clenched his jaw. "Find them. Bring her back alive. The human. Dispose of him." Back at the campfire, Eli looked up at the night sky, unaware of the danger coming closer. Leora leaned her head against the side of the ship, her eyes heavy with exhaustion. For now she felt safe beside the strange human who risked everything for her. And though she couldn't hear his voice, she somehow felt his silent promise. He would never let anyone hurt her again. Morning light touched the mountains like golden fire. The small ship rested between tall cliffs half hidden under shadows. Inside, Eli Cross was awake, checking the ship's damaged systems. Sparks flickered from a broken panel as he wiped sweat from his brow. Across the small cabin, Leora slept curled up under a blanket. Her face looked calm now, nothing like the terrified bride he had rescued. The twin moons were gone, replaced by a bright orange sun. For the first time since the escape, the world seemed peaceful. Eli sat quietly for a moment, watching her breathe. She didn't look like a queen or a royal. She looked human, fragile, real. He smiled faintly and turned back to the control screen, typing notes about repairs. Suddenly a soft sound, metal rolling, broke the silence. The broken crown had slipped off the table and landed near her hand. Leora woke and picked it up carefully, staring at its bent edges and cracked gemstones. She held it like something sacred, something filled with memories she didn't want to lose. Eli noticed and walked over. He picked up a piece of scrap metal and scratched words again. "That crown means a lot to you?" She nodded slowly. Then she began to sign with her hands, slow and graceful. He didn't understand all of it, but he could read the emotion in her eyes, sadness, loss, and guilt. So she did what she could. She took a stick and began to draw in the dust on the floor. First, she drew a large circle, Valora's capital. Then a smaller figure, herself. Around it, she drew faces, royal elders, guards, and one tall crown shape for the king. Eli watched as her fingers moved, showing the story she couldn't speak. She pointed at herself and drew a smaller crown beside her figure. Then she touched her chest. He wrote, "You were supposed to be queen." She nodded, her eyes wet with tears. She drew another symbol, a flame, and crossed it out. Then she wrote on the dusty floor with her finger, "I refuse their law." Eli frowned. "What law?" he whispered, even though she couldn't hear. She looked up at him, her lips forming silent words, and her hand signed something like control, body, and change. He finally understood. The king wanted her to undergo forced transformation, to reshape her body, erase her deafness, and fit the image of perfection. She refused, and that's why they called her broken. Eli felt a wave of anger. He clenched his jaw and wrote again, "You did the right thing." Leora looked at him, surprised. No one had ever told her that before. Her lips trembled, then curved into a small, thankful smile. But their quiet moment ended too soon. The ship's scanner beeped, a faint signal warning. Something was approaching. Eli ran to the controls. 3 dots blinked on the radar, moving fast. He cursed under his breath. "They found us." Leora stood quickly, clutching her crown. Her eyes widened in fear. Eli wrote fast, "We need to hide. Follow me." They stepped out into the morning sun, the cold wind brushing against their faces. Eli led her through narrow paths between the rocks, deeper into the canyon. The air grew thinner and the sound of distant engines echoed in the sky above. They reached a cave hidden behind a waterfall. Mist filled the air as Eli guided her inside. The sound of water didn't reach her ears, but she could feel the vibration through the stone. She smiled softly. It was the kind of sound she could still feel. Inside the cave, Eli set up a small lamp. The golden light reflected off the damp walls, illuminating strange symbols carved deep into the rock. Leora touched one and gasped softly. These were ancient markings of her ancestors, Velaran queens who ruled before the king's line began. She turned to Eli and pressed her hand over his heart. Then she placed the broken crown in his palm, closing his fingers around it. Her eyes were serious now, filled with trust. Eli frowned, confused. "Why give this to me?" he whispered. She mouthed the words slowly, clearly. "Because you listen." Those 3 silent words struck him harder than any sound could. Above them, shadows passed through the sky. Drones scanned the cliffs, searching for life. The king's soldiers were close again. Eli looked toward the cave entrance, then at Leora. "I won't let them find you," he whispered. And though she couldn't hear the promise, she could feel it in the way he looked at her, steady, unshaken, ready to fight. In the darkness of that ancient cave, surrounded by history and danger, the human and the alien bride began to understand each other without words. But far above the cliffs, a royal command ship had just locked onto their signal. The hunt wasn't over. It was only beginning. The cave was quiet except for the soft dripping of water echoing through the stone. Eli Cross sat near the fire he had built, staring at the broken crown resting beside him. The gold was dull now, but it still caught the light in small flashes like tiny stars refusing to fade. Across the cave, Leora sat tracing the carvings on the wall with her fingers. The ancient symbols told stories she had learned as a child, tales of queens who ruled not through beauty or sound, but through heart. It was strange, she thought, that this same cave would now become her hiding place. Eli looked at her and smiled faintly. He still couldn't believe that the woman sitting in front of him, the quiet, gentle soul, was once meant to be a queen. And yet she carried herself with a kind of quiet strength even without a crown. He picked up a metal plate and wrote, "They're still looking for you." "We can't stay here long," Leora nodded. She looked toward the cave's entrance, where sunlight poured through the thin mist. Her heart trembled with fear. She knew the king wouldn't stop. His pride would never allow it. But before Eli could say anything more, the ship's scanner near the entrance began to flash red again. The beeping echoed through the cave. Eli jumped to his feet. "No, not again." He ran to the monitor. 3 royal drones were approaching fast, followed by a larger troop carrier. The king had found them. He turned to Leora and wrote quickly, Hide behind the wall. Don't move. No matter what, she shook her head, signing something with her hands. I won't leave you. But Eli pressed a finger to his lips and pointed toward the deep part of the cave. His eyes begged her to listen. Reluctantly, she obeyed. Moments later, the sound of engines filled the canyon. Dust and wind blew into the cave as 3 alien soldiers stepped inside, armored in black steel. Their leader's mask glowed faintly red. Human mechanic, he said coldly. You are accused of harboring royal property. Eli stood between them and the deeper part of the cave. His heart raced, but his stance didn't break. She's not property, he said firmly. She's a person, and she's not going anywhere with you. The soldiers aimed their rifles. Stand down, human. This is not your fight. Eli's lips curved into a small grin. It is now. Before the soldiers could fire, Eli hit a switch on his wristband. The cave floor shook as a hidden charge exploded, dropping rocks between them. Dust filled the air. Eli dived behind a boulder and grabbed his plasma wrench, modified into a short-range blaster. Blue light flashed as he fired, striking one guard's weapon. The fight echoed through the cave like thunder. The second guard lunged forward, slashing with an energy blade. Eli barely dodged, his sleeve catching fire from the blade's heat. He swung the wrench and hit the guard's mask, cracking it open. From the shadows, Leora watched, her heart pounding. Every flash of light reflected in her wide eyes. She wanted to help, but she didn't know how until she felt it. The vibration, the rhythm of the fight, the energy pulsing through the ground. She closed her eyes and focused. Her ancestors had written about this, the silent gift, a rare power among her kind. When the world's noise disappeared, the true vibrations of life became clear. Leora placed her hands on the wall. The cave trembled faintly. The remaining guard froze as the stone beneath his feet began to hum. In a single wave, the vibration burst outward, knocking him off balance. Rocks fell, sealing part of the entrance. Eli turned in shock. Leora? She stepped forward from the shadows, eyes glowing faintly silver. Her hands moved like the flow of wind, guiding invisible ripples of soundless energy through the air. The last guard tried to fire, but the pulse hit his weapon, throwing him back. The cave fell silent again. Eli stared, speechless. She looked back at him, breathing heavily, and mouthed the words, I felt it. He smiled in awe. You saved us, she smiled back softly. For the first time, she didn't feel ashamed of her silence. It was her strength. But the moment didn't last. From outside, more engines roared. A shadow passed over the canyon, the king's warship. Dozens of red lights scanned the cliffs. Eli looked up and clenched his jaw. We can't keep running forever. He turned to her, holding the broken crown. You said you refused their law. Maybe it's time we show them why you were right. Leora looked at him, uncertain. But when he reached out his hand, she took it without hesitation. The human and the alien bride stood together in the flickering light, 2 outcasts ready to face an empire. The hunt was no longer one-sided. Now they would fight back. The canyon was silent after the battle. Smoke drifted through the broken rocks, and the soft wind carried the smell of metal and fire. Eli Cross stood near the mouth of the cave, his hands trembling slightly, his clothes torn and burned. He had fought soldiers, machines, and fear itself, and somehow he was still standing. Behind him, Leora sat near the wall, exhausted. Her glowing eyes had dimmed, and the stone beneath her still carried faint lines of energy from her power. She looked at her hands, afraid of what she had done, afraid of what she had become. Eli turned and knelt beside her. He picked up a small rag and wiped the dust from her face. You did it, he whispered softly, knowing she couldn't hear but hoping she could feel his calm. You saved both of us, she looked at him, her lips trembling. Then she pointed to herself, signing slowly. I am dangerous. Eli shook his head. He wrote on his metal pad, No, you're powerful. For a long moment she didn't move. Then tears slipped down her cheeks, silent and shining. No one had ever said that to her before. Outside, the king's warship hovered in the distance, waiting. Eli could see it between the clouds, a black shape blotting out the sun. They didn't have much time. He stood up, went to his tool chest, and started gathering parts. Wires, steel pieces, glass, and the broken crown. Leora watched curiously as he laid everything out on the workbench they had built from the ship's scraps. He wrote a single word on the table. Fix. She tilted her head, not understanding. Then he held up the broken crown. You once wore this, he said softly. But it doesn't make you who you are. Let's make it yours again. She stared at him for a moment, then slowly nodded. Together they worked in silence. Eli soldered new wires into the crown's frame while Leora shaped the metal with her energy. Every pulse of her hands made the gold hum gently, glowing like sunlight. She could feel the vibration in her bones, strong, alive, pure. When they finished, the crown was no longer royal gold. It was silver blue, shaped by both of them, half machine, half energy, something completely new. Eli smiled and handed it to her. A queen doesn't need a throne, he said quietly. Just a reason to stand tall. Leora looked at the crown in awe. It wasn't the symbol of the king's rule anymore, it was the mark of her freedom. She placed it on her head, and for the first time, it felt light. That moment didn't last. A deep vibration rolled through the canyon. Eli ran to the cliff's edge and looked down. The royal army had arrived, rows of armored soldiers marching like shadows. The king's warship opened its hangars and hundreds of drones filled the air. Leora joined him at the edge, her face pale but calm. The wind blew through her white hair, carrying dust and light together. She looked at Eli and signed a single word. Run. He shook his head. Not without you. She frowned, shaking her hands harder, almost pleading. But Eli only stepped closer, his eyes steady. You listened to me once, he said quietly. Now I'll listen to you, but not like this. We face this together. Something in his tone, something unspoken, made her heart tremble. She nodded slowly. Eli turned toward the ship. We'll draw them away from the cave, he said. You use your power when I give the signal. She didn't need to hear him. She could read it from his lips. She touched his arm gently, her fingers lingering for a moment longer than before. Her silent eyes said what her voice never could. Be careful. The ground began to shake again as the army approached. The king's voice echoed through the sky from his ship's speakers. You cannot hide, Leora. You belong to the crown. Leora stood beside Eli, her new crown glowing faintly. She raised her chin high and mouthed the words back toward the sky. Not yours anymore. Eli powered up the engines of the old ship. Ready? She nodded. As they lifted off into the storm-filled sky, hundreds of drones locked onto them. But this time Leora wasn't running as a broken bride. She was flying as a queen reborn. The final battle for her freedom had begun. The sky over Valora burned with storm clouds and lightning. The king's warship loomed above, dark and massive, blocking out the sun. Below it, a smaller ship, Eli's old cargo hauler, rose from the canyon like a spark defying the night. Inside the ship, Eli Cross gripped the controls tightly, sweat dripping down his brow. Alarms screamed around him as enemy drones locked on from every direction. Beside him, Leora stood still, her silver eyes glowing softly, the repaired crown shining faint blue light across her face. This time, she wasn't running. She was ready. The king's voice filled the air again, cold and heavy. Surrender, Leora. You belong to the throne. You are nothing without my command. Leora's lips trembled, but not with fear. She pressed her hand to the ship's window and stared at the warship that had once been her prison. The words formed silently on her lips. You will hear me now. Eli looked at her. What are you going to do? He asked, even though he knew she couldn't hear. Still, she seemed to understand. Her hand found his shoulder, gentle, steady. Then she mouthed two words he could read easily. Thank you. Before he could reply, she stepped forward and touched the ship's main console. The crown on her head began to glow brighter, humming like a living heart. The walls vibrated softly, the engines flaring. Outside, the storm thickened. The air filled with electricity, and even the drones paused mid-flight, their sensors confused. Eli watched as light flowed from Leora's hands into the ship's structure, spreading through the metal like veins of energy. Then, the soundless wave came. It was not a sound anyone could hear, but everyone felt it. A pulse of vibration rippled through the air, through the ships, through the very ground of Valora. The king's soldiers clutched their helmets as their systems overloaded. Drones fell from the sky like silver rain. On the king's bridge, the lights flickered. What is this? He shouted, slamming his hand against the console. What is she doing? But Leora didn't need to speak. Her silence carried the truth. Her deafness, once mocked, was her gift. She could channel the world's vibrations, the very heartbeats of life itself. Eli's ship flew straight toward the warship. "Leora, stop," he started, but then he saw her expression, calm, unbroken, royal. She wasn't afraid. She was finally free. The warship fired. Blazing plasma tore through the clouds. Eli swerved, barely dodging one blast, but another hit the side of the hull. The ship shook violently. Metal screamed. Sparks rained from the ceiling. Eli grabbed the manual controls, shouting, "Hold on!" even though he knew she couldn't hear him. Still, she turned and smiled faintly, as if she somehow felt his voice through the trembling floor. The next blast missed. The king's weapons were failing, sensors blinded by her energy. Leora stepped closer to the console, raised her hands and let the light surge through her once more. For a moment, time itself seemed to stop. The clouds parted, revealing both moons shining above the battlefield. The light from her crown spread across the sky like a wave. Every drone in the fleet went silent. Every ship lost control. And in the heart of it all, Leora stood unshaken. The king fell to his knees on his ship's bridge, clutching his head as the vibrations grew stronger. For the first time, he could hear what she had always lived with, silence filled with truth. He whispered, trembling, "What have you become?" Her lips formed the answer softly, "A queen who listens." The king's ship cracked, engines failing. Flames burst from its sides as it began to fall. Eli pulled the ship up, fighting to escape the explosion. "Come on, girl. Just a little higher," he shouted. The ship barely made it above the fire as the king's flagship crashed into the canyon below, lighting the sky with orange flame. Silence followed. Real, pure silence. Eli's ship drifted under the twin moons. Inside, smoke filled the cabin, but they were alive. He turned to Leora. She was weak, her glow fading. He rushed to her side, holding her gently. "Hey, it's over. You did it." She smiled faintly, touching his cheek. Her fingers moved slowly. "No, we did." Outside the window, the ashes of the royal fleet floated like stars. Valora was free, not by force but by the quiet strength of one woman who was never meant to be perfect. Leora looked out at the sky one last time, then rested her head on Eli's shoulder. The ship drifted toward the dawn, carrying the sound of peace only she could truly feel. And in the silence that followed, the galaxy remembered her name, Leora, the Silent Queen.